This screencast is going to show you how to find equivalent ratios. Equivalent ratios are very similar to equivalent fractions, so if you remember how to find equivalent fractions, which are two fractions that are equal to one another just using different numbers, then you should also be able to find equivalent ratios. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first slide, and this is going to talk a little bit about how to find equivalent ratios. So in order to find equivalent ratios, you can either use multiplication or division. Now you'll notice that I have both ratios, 1/3 and 12/15, written in fraction form. Remember that you can also write your ratios as 1:3 or 1:2:3. And these are all the same thing. So you could write it as 12:15 or 12:2:15. So let's take a look at our multiplication example. You'll notice that I had 1/3. In order to find an equivalent ratio, I multiplied by 2 on the top and the bottom. Or if you're using a regular looking ratio, so using a colon or using the word 2, you would just multiply both numbers in the ratio by the same number. Same thing with division. With division, you're going to divide both numbers in the ratio by the same number. Division means that your numbers should be getting smaller. So if you start with two larger numbers, you may want to use division. However, with multiplication, your numbers are smaller and then they would be getting bigger. They're still equal though. So let's take a look at two examples. So like I said before, we have our ratios written as fractions. We could also write them using a colon or using the word 2. So in number 1, we're going to use the idea of multiplication to find our equivalent ratios. And in number 2, we're going to use the idea of division to find our equivalent ratios. So let's go ahead and take a look at 2/7. And when you're finding an equivalent ratio using multiplication, you can multiply by any number as long as you're multiplying the top and the bottom or both numbers by the same multiplier. So if I decide to multiply 2 by 3, I also need to multiply 7 times 3. And that's going to get me 2 times 3 is 6, and 7 times 3 is 21. So this 6/21 would be my new ratio. If I used the traditional looking ratio of 2:7, I would just multiply by 3. Notice how I'm doing it on both sides, and I would get 6/21. And this would still be the same equivalent ratio for both. Let's go ahead and take a look at our second example. I have, once again, 8/12 or 8/12 or 8/12 written in fraction form. So when I'm using the idea of division, I want to think about what is a common factor or a common number that can be divided into both 8 and 12. Some numbers that you may want to think of would include 2, 3, 4, or 5. Most times those are going to be your common divisors that you can divide into both numbers in your ratio. So in this case, I could divide 8/12 by 2. So if I divide 8 and 12 by 2, because both of them are even, 8 divided by 2 is 4, 12 divided by 2 is 6. 4/6 is equivalent to 8/12. I could also take the idea of 8 to 12 and divide it by something else. I could divide it by its largest common factor, which would be the number 4. If I do 8 divided by 4, I would get 2, and I would write the word 2, and then 12 divided by 4 is 3. This 2/3 is our ratio written in simplest form because we can't divide 2 or 3 by any other numbers. So now it's your turn. So what I would like you guys to do is pause the video. In problem number 1, you're going to use the idea of multiplication. And in problem number 2, you're going to use the idea of division. So go ahead and find an equivalent ratio for 4/5 and find an equivalent ratio for 16/18. And then hit play to check your answer. So for me, I'm going to take 4/5 and I'm just going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2. So 4 times 2 is 8, 5 times 2 is 10. You could also multiply by 3. If you multiply by 3, you should get 12/15. If you multiply by 4, you would get 16/20, and so on, because you could multiply by any number as long as it's the same on the top and the bottom. Looking at 16/18, we need to think of some common divisors between 16 and 18. Well, 16 and 18 are both even, so we could divide by 2. When we divide by 2, 16 divided by 2 is 8. 18 divided by 2 is 9. So this would be an equivalent ratio using 16/18 and dividing it to find a smaller numbered equivalent ratio of 8/9. So just to review quickly, how to find equivalent ratios, we can use the idea of multiplication, where we multiply both numbers in the ratio by the same number. We can also use the idea of division, where we divide both numbers in the ratio by the same number. So now you're going to practice. So hopefully this video helped you to understand how to find equivalent ratios a little bit better.